You get to the Vienna Gambit playing white. After e4, black responds pawn e5, and now knight c3, reserving the opportunity to play pawn f4 on the next move. Black usually responds either knight f6 or knight c6. When your opponent goes for knight f6, and you continue with pawn f4, if your opponent is unfamiliar with the theory of the Vienna Gambit, they're highly likely to get into trouble very quickly. Black is simply to capture. Pawn takes f4 is a big blunder for black, because now you just push pawn e5, and all of a sudden it turns out that even though seemingly this knight has a lot of ways to move forward, all those squares are already under the control of white's pieces. Therefore, the knight has to go back. The one thing you gotta watch over is check, potentially queen h4. And the way to stop it is very simply just play knight f3 first. And on the next move, you're gonna play pawn d4 after whatever black does. Let's say pawn d6, you play pawn d4. Here, if black plays any usual move, you just take here and everything's great. But what if black takes here on e5? Theoretically, you could recapture here, let's say, with a pawn, but that would allow an exchange of queens. Playing queen e2. We're temporarily sacrificing this pawn on e5 because it's currently pinned, and we're gonna get it back anyway. Black will play something, knight to c6 or whatever. Now you can grab this pawn as well, taking advantage of the pin. On the next move, you're gonna pick up this pawn on e5. If black wants to neutralize the pin, black will play something like bishop e7. Now you can pick up this pawn on e5. Thanks to this pawn on e5, black can't develop normally. Also, on the next move, you're gonna play rook d1 and hit the queen. Also very uncomfortable for black to deal with it. And again, you have huge lead in development, control over the central squares. All is great. You're actually having a winning position here. We already know that taking here on f4 is pretty bad for black, because after that, you just start pressing black with pawn e5, pushing this knight back, and getting in dominant position. Black may try defending this pawn with either pawn d6 or knight c6, and actually both moves are bad. And knight c6, now after you take on e5 and knight recaptures, you've got d4, and you start once again pressuring black, quite similar to the previous variation. Now when the knight comes back, doesn't really matter where it goes, you keep pushing pawn e5. Similarly, the knight has to go back, where a couple moves in the game, you're developing your pieces, you control the center, you have a lot of open diagonals for your pieces, and black literally has nothing. All their pieces are completely inactive. I'm gonna share with you like one game in this variation that just illustrates how quickly your attack can roll here. After d5, white played bishop d3, black played knight e7, white castled, black played bishop f5, trying to trade off some pieces and maybe have an easier life, but white responded with knight g5, and now that's another big advantage of the Vienna Gambit overall, is that you're having this f semi-open file for your rook, and it's ready to target the f7 square, the weakest pawn in black's position, which is in close proximity to the king. And basically black is falling apart here after this exchange. There's already no way for black to defend the f7 pawn, and black is just losing here. It's time to resign. The third way for black to deal with this attack of black's central pawn would be defending this pawn by playing pawn d6. And it looks like a very standard move to just defend the pawn, but it's a passive move that locks this bishop behind the pawns, and definitely it cannot be the refutation of the Vienna Gambit whatsoever. You just play knight f3, keep attacking this pawn with your knight as well. If black defends it, you play bishop b5. Now thanks to the pin, you're actually renewing the threat to this pawn on e5. Black is going to play bishop d7, then you play pawn d3 to defend your center. But even if black doesn't blunder the pawn, anyway, your position is much more active after castling. You've got these nice pawns in the center of the board, you have the f-file for your rook in the future. Black just goes bishop e7, which actually blunders simply the pawn, because now you can eliminate the defender, and then just grab this pawn on e5. After pawn takes, knight takes e5, now you're attacking the bishop, and there is nothing black can do. White was critical for white to play d3 first. So black can't possibly grab here. It will be lost because the pawn is defending. So that's why we play d3 first, and after that we go for this exchange on c6 and we win the pawn. The correct response for black here is the move pawn d5. Now you take on e5, black recaptures on e4. You gotta watch over this potential check. But I suggest that you play queen to f3. Your opponents will usually capture here on c3 because that's the most obvious reaction to this attack of black's knight here on e4. Now after they recapture, you can recapture by a pawn, and you're actually preparing to castle queenside. Black goes usually bishop e6 or any other move, doesn't really matter, your moves are going to be the same. You play bishop f4, bring your bishop out, black plays pawn c5, and now you castle queenside. Black actually plays knight c6, which is already a blunder. In blunders to move bishop c4, and we're already taking advantage of this pin, and we're winning this pawn on d5. So basically you already obtained a winning position. black here plays queen a5, so the most straightforward capture here, just win a pawn and get a technically winning position. So that's the correct move.